Sorry about that. So you can see I started a little further forward like this. And now as I push that down, I can sort of ease back a little bit and I'm starting to catch a little more from back here. I'm sort of feeling out where that grain change is. And I'm making it so that I'm ending up, hopefully, with a transition that is almost unnoticeable. I don't want it to be obvious that, oh, this was cut in this direction and then this was cut in the other direction. I want to blend the two so that it's not super obvious and it's not even something that you think about. That would be my goal, is that it's not even something that you think about. All right, so now I do the other side. Here's the deal with the other side. When you're carving this side, um, you're using the tip of the knife and you can see the wood that you've cut emerges from behind the tip of the knife almost immediately. Over here, you're sort of using the tip of the knife, but it's you're using the fatter part of the blade. Here you're using the tip, the taper. And here, the part that is creating the rim is the fatter part. And so it's going to create a different sort of cut. And you have to treat it differently. You can't just treat it as a mirror image of what's happening on the other side, or you'll end up with a lopsided shoulder from one side to the other. So it's getting the shoulders to be symmetrical is one of the trickier things. And it's just because I think we think of them as being the same cut, but they're not really. All right, so again, now that I've done this forward bit, I can sort of now lean back into this transitional material here and gently, gently lower it down. Just a little bit. Just a little bit like that. Good. So now, hey, this might be a good place to plug the fact that this coming month's online course I'm going to do largely through audio form. I'm going to have, obviously I've created a lot of video content that people can watch, but I'm going to try and create it in such a way that it becomes something that you can listen to while you're carving and still get the information. And then if you want to see something, because a picture sometimes is worth 1,000 words, there's lots of resources already made, but I want to try and create a resource for the students of this month where they can be carving, they can be in the car, they can really sort of gather the information without having to sit there watching. Because there's so many parts of my life I know where I just don't have the time to sit and watch somebody. And if instead the information can be portrayed in a way that is deliberately delivered so that it can be absorbed while you're doing something else, I think there's real benefit to that. So if anyone's interested in taking part in this month's online course, it starts tomorrow, and it's fun. Each one I try and sort of do everything fresh, and there's new stuff that comes out of each session. And whether you've done it before or not, I've had people who've done courses a handful of times now, and they tell me they get something out of it each time that's different. And obviously a lot of the information will be available freely to everybody, but the interactions within the group and from the group with me is sort of the unique part that you don't get unless you are part of the paying cohort. So it's $50. Let me know if you're interested. God, I hate plugging stuff like that. At any rate, so now I can feel, I don't want to make these back shoulders too thin because there's a lot of strength that radiates out from these back corners. If you make them too thin, you lose that stiffness and resistance to flex like this. Hey, thanks, Sherry. So you lose that stiffness and resistance to flex. At the same time, you want the shoulders, if they're too thick, you really feel it in sort of how clunky the spoon feels. So it's worth really spending time back here learning by doing just how far you can push it. Um, and it's one of those things where you're like, oh, I've been doing this for 10 minutes now. Is it really worth continuing? But in my experience, this is one of the things that separates a really delightful spoon from one that just kind of misses the mark a little bit, is getting this shoulder thickness just right. Okay, good. Now, all right. So now, you see how there's like a little too much material right here. So now is my moment to just ferret down, and this is where I'm going to trim down the keel. Remember I said the keel is easy to cut at any point, and now that I've got everything else resolved, I can see how much I could reduce the keel and still have the spoon be plenty strong. So you can see, I pushed it down a little bit. Check the flex. Check the grain flow, right? I want to make sure that there's a long transition of grain flow here. So in part, if this were radial, I might push this a little further. I do, Matt. I decided to go for it. It's funny. Whenever I shave, I always feel like $1,000,000 right after I shave, and then the next day I'm like, I wish I hadn't shaved. So I shaved last night, and this morning I'm like, wow. All right. So now that I have the neck the way I want it now, I just need to sort of loosely build those facets down. So part of what happened with the shaving, I know, is I went to go get a new passport yesterday morning with my family, and they went to the post office. They took the picture, and they're like, "Don't smile, no teeth." And I came out, and they like showed me the picture, and I was like, "Oh my God, I look so old," um, and so unhappy. No smiling, no teeth. And I think the shaving is in reaction to that. Now, ironically, perhaps it would have been good if I'd had that realization beforehand and shaved before, but whatever. I generally don't particularly like shaving, but we'll see. I might keep it up. Okay, there we have it, except for the rim cuts. You haven't. I know. I do it only a couple times a year. All right, so now I'm doing my micro chamfers on the rim. Now, first of all, notice how steep the knife is to the bowl rim. If you go too shallow, you're going to end up tearing out the grain, because remember, the grain is flowing from the tip down this way. So you're actually going uphill in the grain if your knife is shallow. You're going downhill in the grain if your knife is more at 45, more at 90 degrees to the rim, like this. Okay. So the other thing about these micro chamfers is, how do you get them small and even? And I think one of the biggest ways I do it is by almost exerting no pressure and basically just letting the weight of the knife be the determining factor of how much material comes off. I think as soon as you start exerting pressure, it becomes very hard to maintain an even amount of pressure. Whereas if it's just about the weight of the knife and almost a scraping motion, that is easier to keep consistent because the weight of the knife doesn't change. Okay, so there I did the top bit. Yeah, good. Now I'm going to do the back bit. Same deal. As small as I can. Really, really small. These micro chamfers are important both for durability, because by knocking off that corner, you make it more robust and less prone to breaking. And also, it, particularly with eating spoons, it makes it really much more comfortable in your mouth. So I do it on all my spoons. With the cooking spoons, it has more to do with strength and durability. And with the eating spoons, it's both of those things. So Okay, good. Now, I'll show you guys something. Put away my tools for a second here. So, what I want to show you is how there are slight imperfections along that rim. There are slight little spots where I could go and try and get a cleaner cut. But what I've found is that the burnisher is going to do it for me. That amount of imperfection, particularly if I've taken the time to do microchamfers, will make it so that it's close enough to a smooth curve that the burnisher will take it all the rest of the way to a smooth curve. Simply by, it's able to compress the fibers by that amount. And they tend to stay compressed enough, even though they bounce back a little bit when I treat, that it doesn't really matter. So when you use the burnisher, or any burnisher, you want to make sure you're supporting the spoon. You don't want to hold it like this because you might put too much strain on the neck of the spoon. So always support the spoon bowl in the palm of your hand. And likewise, don't press down super hard if all you're doing is resting the tip on your knee. The way I do, it's a light motion. And I tend to favor sort of light motion where I'm doing lots of passes over sort of fewer passes with a lot more pressure. And notice I'm doing every part of the rim. The edges, the top of the rim, the underside of the rim, the whole thing. Now here on the top, because same deal, I've gotten it close enough to a curve, I actually use quite a bit of pressure, pressing down, and I'm able to make the tip of the spoon almost look like it was sanded. But in a fraction of the time it would take me to sand it to that level of smoothness. So that's the sort of thing that I'm really excited about burnishing, is like the interplay of burnished forms with knife finished forms, and how you can sort of have both within the same spoon. They're all sold out. I mean, I have a waiting list, Tom. Basically, the guy can't make them as fast as people want them. So at some point, I hope to have some kicking around, but I don't now. If you want to get on the list, I'm happy to put you on the list. Just let me know. And if you want on the list, Tom, I can't remember if I have your address or not. If you could DM me your address, that would be good. All right, so now that's as far as I used to take it. And then I had a student who they're 15 plus shipping, Tom, and shipping to Australia is a fair bit. I mean, honestly, Tom, you should just try making them yourself, or like find a potter that you could have commissioned that shape, or any shape. I'm sure there are cheaper ways to get them, and I don't need the money from them. It's a service I'm offering to people, so I don't feel like if somebody went and had a potter they knew make them their own porcelain one, it's not like I'd be like, hey, that was my business, because quite frankly, it's most of the money goes to the maker. It is a better story, isn't it? So this is this broomcorn polisher, and the nice thing about it is it has some flex, and so you notice I'm using the sides. Well, it can wrap around two facets as long as they're not too steep. If they're like that, it'll hit both sides. And some people like just one over the other. Matt, I think, exclusively uses this. He doesn't use the burnisher, but he loves this. And I use both. I use the polisher after the burnisher, just because I feel like I end up with a better surface if I do it that way. All right, and so you can see how much, well, I don't know if you can see, but the form is sort of a lot cleaner. The wait's probably several months, Tom. He said he would try and get it down to a month and a half between orders, but he just got me an order last week, and I suspect he's going to be at least 2, possibly 3 months between orders. just because it's, sort of the thing where he has to sort of build up enough other stuff to actually fire the kiln. Um, all right, send me a thing with exactly what you want, Tom, and I will get you down. All right, so let's talk finishes for a second. So I used to use linseed oil, um, and I always hated how it tasted. It's basically flaxseed oil. And I also hated how it took a spoon like this that has two beautiful colors and it makes it really yellow, especially lighter woods. It just makes them really yellow. And so I hated how it tasted. I hated how it was yellow. I hated how, for people who have the habit of soaking their spoons in oil, like they actually exude oil for a long time. Um, and so I started using this beeswax jojoba oil mixture that I had actually been making as lip balm. And I found that it's really nice because while it's not a hardening oil, um, so uh, it's not going to harden on the surface of the wood. That's not really the point. And I was talking with Jane Mickleborough about it at Spoonfest this time last year, and she was saying how she feels like the oil is like it's basically just to keep the spoon from getting smudged or oxidizing, and uh, and that sort of less is more. And then I've had some spoons like from Daniel Lundgren's Storsloyd, where he just sent me these great spoons, and they're not finished with anything. They're birch. Excuse me, they're completely unfinished, and they're delightful. And so I think the idea that you have to finish your spoon with something um, is is just not true. Wood is totally fine untreated, even though it will absorb stains from the foods, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to do that anyways, no matter what you finish it with. So don't fool yourself unless you're coating it with epoxy, which is gross. That you're going to make this spoon that is a wooden object that's never going to change color from this point onward. It's just not going to be true. It's going to change color. It's going to darken over time. It's going to develop patina, and that's a beautiful thing. And so I'm not impressed with spoon finishes that propose to protect the wood because I don't think the wood needs to be protected. I do think the wood needs to be protected from smudging from your hands. If you struggle with your hands smudging spoons, probably the biggest culprit is you have a strop rattling around in your toolbox that is getting compound all over your tool handles, and or you have sharpening stones and stuff and it's all rattling around with your tools and you're not washing your hands after sharpening, all that stuff, and then the moisture in the wood is picking up the stuff. I'll get back to it in a second. So so I do think it's okay to use I like using this treatment because it protects my spoons from smudging, it keeps them from oxidizing and changing color, and I just like the way it makes the grain pop a little bit. So the reason I use the beeswax jojoba oil, again, I was using it as lip balm for years. Jojoba oil is from a drought-tolerant plant native to the American Southwest, and it was tested by NASA to see if they could use it to replace the sperm whale oil that they use on spaceships. Because sperm whale oil is extremely tolerant of high temperatures and low temperatures, extremes. And jojoba oil was, I don't think it quite made the cut to replace it, but it was considered a good possibility to at least test it. So it is extremely stable. It doesn't go rancid. It's technically a liquid wax in that it is a wax, but it's liquid at room temperature. And I use it with beeswax rather than just straight because I think because I like having a tin rather than a bottle of oil. So by mixing it with the beeswax, you end up with this substance as opposed to an oil that then I have to I don't know. Oil is just it's not as pleasant. So it's a 2-to-1 ratio, oil to wax. I get all my materials from Amazon. I've looked into getting them from local sources, groovy sources, etc. But I find well, first of all, jojoba oil, I don't know of any groovy sources, so I just buy the sort of cheaper bulk version, organic, from Amazon. Yeah. And as for the beeswax, I've found it really helpful because I really value that it doesn't yellow the wood. I want white beeswax that has had the, I don't know how they drain the color out of it, um, but you can buy beeswax that is more raw, that is yellowy, and that will make your spoons more yellow. Yeah, I'll get to that in a second, Lucas. Um, and I like the white beeswax because then I end up with this you can see how white it is. It doesn't change the color of the wood. So if I'm doing something like birch or something, I'm not going to create a yellow spoon at the end. And hi, hi. And and the other nice thing about getting the beeswax from Amazon, which for me, I live out in the country, it's just a convenient choice, is that I can get pelleted beeswax, which just makes it a lot faster to get it to melt. Because what I do is I stick it, I basically, um, I have a coffee can, not a coffee can, like a can that you get tomatoes in, like a large metal can. And it's worked out so that I buy 16 ounces of beeswax and jojoba oil, like the bottle and the bag of beeswax are the same amount. It just worked out that way. So to get 2 to 1, I put in all of the bottle of oil and half the package of beeswax, and then I get my ratio without having to think about it too hard. Um, and the trick is you want to make sure that you don't go right up to the rim of the can, because when this whole thing heats up, it's going to expand, and you really don't want that hot oil to go down onto your stove flame. So make sure that you leave a solid 3/4 of an inch from the lip of the can, and don't leave it unattended. So I just put the can right on the stove burner, turn it on once I've poured in the right ratio of stuff. And I honestly, like when I did less than that, I just eyeball it. Um, oh, interesting. Super interesting. Um, okay, that's really cool to know, Andrea. Um, so, so I just eyeball it, and there are times when I've ended up with it a little too runny, times when it's ended up a little too stiff. If you feel like it's one or the other and it's still in the can, you can just sort of put it back on, scoop out a little bit, put in the right sort of other thing to make it the right ratio. But it's roughly 2 to 1 oil to wax, and then it's important once it's all melted to stir it, um, because otherwise the wax will form these sort of layers within the oil where it will stratify and create these little slivers of wax, which then will harden differently than the mixture around it. So you want to stir it. I just use a chopstick, just stir it a bunch of times, turn off the flame, stir it a bunch of times, let it sit and harden. And then while it's still in that can, I then stick the chopstick into it a bunch of times. I've had a picture of it in my stories at one point where I just stick the chopstick into it a million times and poke holes into it, and that breaks up the wax structure. And then I can scoop it out with a spoon and smear it into these tins. And the nice thing about having it smeared into the tins is you saw how easily I could, scoop this out. It's buttery in a way that, like when you buy lip balm from someplace, you know how a lot of times, like getting that first fingerful out is really hard, and that's because as it cools and hardens, it forms this crystalline structure, I guess, and it's really helpful to break up that crystalline structure so that it's easy for you to scoop out with your finger at the end, like that. So I know Matt uses grapeseed oil. So let's get back to finishing oils for a second. I know this is a lot of talking and not me doing anything, but linseed oil tastes gross. Tung oil tastes even worse. Walnut oil tastes okay, but it still yellows the wood. Tried and true oil, which I know they said is food safe, I just find so disgusting and creepy that I don't understand why people take the company's word for it that it's food safe. I guess this is because I had the experience of working at a dairy farm that was just starting up a yogurt business, and I was amazed when they came to make their containers that at a certain scale, and I'm sure Tried and True is above that certain scale, but when you're a certain small scale, you're not required to send something in for testing. You're allowed to basically say this is what's in it, and like as far as nutritional facts on food, you basically just take this sort of like baseline cookie cutter thing out of a book of like this is how much is in it. Um, Now I put it right on the flame. Um, Not a pan of simmering water. I used to do something like that, but and you could, but I put it right on the flame and then I just watch it and make sure I don't overfill the can. So at any rate, I feel really passionately that a lot of these oils are really kind of gross, and not something I want on my spoon. Um, Grapeseed oil is neutral tasting, and it also doesn't yellow the spoon unless you do the heat treatment, which is the other thing that I do. So let's talk about the heat treatment for a second. So I find it really valuable to put on this stuff. Right over to the stove here. I find it really valuable to put on this stuff and then essentially turn it over a stove flame. So I smear it on, and then I basically heat up the spoon by doing this. Notice how quickly I'm turning it. It is possible to singe the spoon if you don't turn it, and the turning also keeps the oil from dripping off. Now, as it heats up, it's going to, and sometimes I, go back and forth like this. It doesn't have to be a complete spin. It's going to be absorbed by areas with end grains sooner, and you want to keep smearing any extra that's on your hand onto those places, which is usually the tip of the bowl and the back shoulders here. And you want to keep smearing it on. And then how much you heat it up really just depends on, I don't know, any number of factors. It's very inexact. And it's basically, my theory that A, it helps it absorb more of the stuff, but it also helps harden the wood. And I don't scientifically know what's going on, but if I had to guess, my guess is it's like in driving out the moisture, it's helping collapse the cell walls a little bit, and just a tiny little bit, and you can feel that it gets harder, which I think is good for durability. And then, hold on, I gotta get the rag. So then, all I do is I just wipe it down. This is just an old t-shirt. It's been washed, don't worry guys. And it's good to go. Not only does this stuff on my hands really make it so that I don't have cracked cuticles in the wintertime, but it also means that here we are, less than 2 minutes after finishing the spoon, it's ready to put aside, ready to sell, ready for anyone to use. It's just ready to go, which is what I love about this process, because it's just very flexible and it smells delicious. Hemp seed oil or flaxseed oil. So they're okay in the sense that they are food grade. I don't know anything about hemp seed oil. Flaxseed oil is linseed oil. It's the same plant. Flaxseed is just sort of how it's described when it's sold in a grocery store versus when it's sold as in a hardware store context. So yeah, everything I said about linseed oil applies to flaxseed oil. And I suspect, I don't know anything about hemp oil. But again, I like having the texture of this because it's easier to store this. Now I will say, it's valuable if you're gonna get this, to get the screw top lid, because particularly in the summertime, it can get hot enough that it doesn't turn back into a liquid, but it kind of like weeps oil a little bit. So it's helpful to have the screw top lid as opposed to simply the press fit lid if you're buying tins. Any opinions on food grade mineral oil? Um, oh, interesting that it's green but then turns oil. That doesn't surprise me. Um, so food grade mineral oil, I think, is fine unless you're grossed out by the fact that it's a petroleum product. So I don't use it. But I mean, I think it's one of these things that's like refined petroleum. And there's lots of times when that's part of our lives. But I don't know. I'm happy enough with this process that I haven't exhaustively researched anything else. Is to the honest truth. Um, it's not that expensive. Like to buy a bottle of jojoba oil at the size that I buy it is $21 on Amazon, and then the beeswax is usually 12. Let's call it 13. So we're talking $34, and it probably makes. Well, no, because then you're actually gonna need 2 to 1 oil to wax. So then you're only gonna use half of that wax. Stand by. I am gonna do the math. So you're really only using like $6 of beeswax and $21 of jojoba oil, and let's call it 27. And then you could probably make 10 of these at least from that amount. So each one of these is $3 and a couple cents for this amount. And then I sell these. What do I sell these for? I think I sell these for $6 because like the tins are expensive. But the stuff is not that crazy expensive to just make some yourself. How does the wax hold up against a hot bowl of soup, for example? I have never noticed like a sheen of stuff coming off of it. Here I'll show you an example of. So I don't retreat my spoons. I tend to just leave them. Stand by for a second. And here. So, all right. So first of all, here's the newly finished spoon. Here's a spoon I finished around Christmas time, and you can see the development of patina. I don't think I've refinished this once. It's definitely like a smooth satin finish at this point. I could refinish it if I wanted to, but I don't feel a great need to. Here's a spoon finished in the same way, and this spoon is like a year and a half old, and it's also gone through the dishwasher a whole bunch of times. And you can see it's totally fine. Here's one of the spoons from Daniel Lundgren that's completely unfinished. And, I've used it in my coffee a handful of times, but it, all of them have a sort of slight satiny thing going on. This is definitely the smoothest at this point. Spoons are always at their smoothest if you've done a good job finishing them when you first finish them, just because they've got sort of the most smoothness, etc. And then over time, as they get used, they get more satiny. But then, but they do still. There's a smoothness that comes with the knife finish that I'd call more of like a satin smoothness than a like glossy smoothness. So that's really it. Was there any other questions? Yeah, and then I have lip balm as a bonus. Exactly. So that's it. You're going to say you leave stirring spoons or anything goes in the hot water unfinished, as curing oils takes ages. Yeah, exactly. And and so this is a good alternative for me because I get the hardening, right? I don't think I could do the hardening part without the oil. So if I want to have the effect of hardening the tip, which I think is really valuable, then I need to be smearing oil onto it because otherwise I'd be worried about cracking the wood um, from it drying out too much because there's still moisture in there. You don't want it to, the oil needs to be able to soak in to replace the moisture that's being lost. Um, what kind of scoops, Tom? You mean like a coffee scoop or like a big flour scoop? Like yesterday, was that yesterday? No, Friday. Um, so I think this is a good option if you want to get the hardening effect for something that's going to go into. What about Michigan Sloyd doing that curing cycle thing? I don't know what you're referring to. Does he have like a curing cabinet with like a light bulb in it? Like I've seen people like on sailing ships often, like the dry dock will have like a little cabinet. Um, I don't know, Tom, when I'm doing the next one. I'd have to look at my book of orders. It's not here, otherwise I'd tell you. Um, but at some point I will. Um, yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot of room to explore. Basically, is there's a lot of room to explore different ideas like this, and we're just at the beginning of the process. I gotta go, guys. Bye.